And then it had a chapter over global warming, which is just not the kind of thing I feel like I should be reading about when I'm feeling particularly obsessive, because I got very sidetracked and immediately started doing internet research for 5 hours straight. Hey guys, it's Nicole. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. I like to post about books and music, mostly Taylor Swift. I just recorded a whole intro without actually hitting record, so that's how things are going for me. I planned these videos out like a few months in advance. I did not realize what all would be happening. Now, when I was planning on doing this video, as most of you know, my family is in Ukraine. I mentally am not where I was at the time I was reading these books, but I kind of remember how I was feeling. As of right now, I feel hopeless, unmotivated, tired all the time. It's not as much anxiousness, because I feel like there's no point in being anxious. Like, there's no hope for anything. I've never felt like this in my life. I don't even know where to begin to try to feel better, because I feel like it's very external. But to explain where I was coming from when I read all of these books and how I was feeling, I've never been to a therapist. I probably won't be able to for a while. I am on my parents' insurance and like financially dependent on them. I know some people who have OCD get very like upset about people who are like self-diagnosing or are not able to get a diagnosis. I'm not claiming to have anything, and I'm not claiming to be qualified on ranking these books on like how helpful they would be for people with different kinds of OCD or just people with OCD in general. It's just how it helped me. And at the time I was having this particular breakdown, like when Googling how I was feeling, the way I was feeling was very restless and thoughts that go in a loop and like get like sticky, I guess. Like you can't stop thinking the same thing, and it, like I was having compulsions for sure. I still kind of do, but it's a whole different feeling now. But ever since college, I would say I've just been way more anxious as a person and can't stop thinking the same things that there's nothing I can do about it. It's out of my control, but I obsess regardless. So I'm gonna try to go back in time to the last few months and rank these books. Some of them are self-help books with coping mechanisms and different forms of therapy that I was learning about, and others are just books with characters who have OCD. I'm a really nervous person. I'm just gonna try to be, just based on my opinion, if they were helpful to me or not, or if they are good books for someone who's maybe experiencing symptoms that are similar to people who have OCD. That's it. We're just gonna be trying to have a good time. But first, I would like to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Wild Rose Press. I have worked with them before. They sent me this book, Against My Better Judgment, by B.T. Polcari. It's such a cute little mystical cover. I'm just going to read you a little synopsis on the back. When freshman year at the University of Alabama draws to a close, Sarah Donovan finds herself grappling with the same old question: listen to her head or follow her heart. What she ends up doing is purchasing an Egyptian souvenir funerary mask, and after a mysterious phone call, she's certain a ring of antiquity smugglers are operating in Tuscaloosa. With finals never far from her mind and her return to Bama hanging in the balance, she should be studying. Instead, she launches her own investigation to prove her mask is indeed a stolen artifact and not a cheap trinket. When it comes time to snoop, Sarah is more than ready, or at least she was, until a hot new teaching assistant moves in next door. Suddenly she learns things are never as they seem, ever. This book is just over 200 something pages. I feel like I should read it at some point soon because it seems like a very light, get out of a slump type of read. It's not that the stuff I'm reading isn't interesting right now, it's just so hard to not just find time but just focus on reading. So I think this will be a nice little fluffy romance to get into. If you guys are interested in this book, I will leave the link to it down in the description, and thank you so much to the Wild Rose Press for sponsoring today's video. I made my little chart. It's kind of hard to see the titles, but you know, I just don't have the energy right now to fix that. My scale is from most helpful to not helpful at all. First, we're going to start with the healthy compulsive taking the wheel of the driven personality. So this is about OCPD, which is different from OCD. It's a personality disorder as opposed to, what is OCD? Psychological then, I guess. So this is basically for people who are like workaholics. I'm still conflicted on whether or not I was thinking I had OCD or OCPD, because it's kind of like I have compulsions that I can't stop, but also I don't know when to stop in other aspects of my life as well. So who freaking knows? I'm not here to claim anything that I have or don't have. This wasn't as straightforward as I might have preferred, but I really liked the visual explanations of things, like how your personality is made up of someone in the driver's seat, someone in the passenger seat, and then there's a child who wants to enjoy things about life, but sometimes the child gets like locked in the trunk, and the person who's driving wants to only do the productive things of life, and the person in the passenger seat is supposed to create balance between like working and playing, I guess. Really nice mental image. I think it was helpful. Next, I read the Anxiety and Phobia workbook. The first half was full of really helpful coping mechanisms and breathing techniques. I also really like that it put a stress on helping yourself and becoming as better as you can before starting to look into and rely on medications, like doing what you can before you go the pharmaceutical route. Personally, that's something that I find important. It got really weird after the halfway point though. It started tying in religion, and then it had a chapter over global warming, which is just not the kind of thing I feel like I should be reading about when I'm feeling particularly obsessive, because I got very sidetracked and immediately started doing internet research for 5 hours straight. I liked how much power it put on the mind, but I just feel like just maybe get rid of the chapter about global warming, because that when you're coming to a book like this, like people usually can be triggered by things like that. I'm gonna put it in okay, because it did have some really good ideas about coping, but it's just like, why do you got to bring global warming into this? That knocks it down a lot for me. So then I read The Man Who Couldn't Stop. This was very interesting to read because this was about people who have the same thought patterns that I was experiencing, but to a very extreme extent. It had a history of mental health treatments and even lobotomies, which really explained just kind of how far OCD treatment has come. I didn't realize how much the compulsions fuel the obsessions, because the more you check on something, the worse your memory gets. It had a study included of people who do not have OCD who checked to make sure they did something 19 times, and the more they checked, the more they weren't able to remember if they actually did it. Like, it shows that the compulsions really make themselves worse the more that you do them. They are not helping. Nice to say in theory, hard to actually put in practice, but I thought this was pretty good. I'm gonna put it in helpful. Next, I read The Imp of the Mind. So this talked about intrusive thoughts mostly and how that leads to OCD, but also how intrusive thoughts occur in every single human being. If you say you don't have them, you're either lying or it means you have them, but you don't view them as intrusive. It was kind of frustrating that for people who have intrusive thoughts of harming children when they obviously don't want to do that, it was suggesting to walk past clinics as exposure therapy. This book might be really dated. Whatever works for whoever, I guess. It had a few interesting points, but overall it was just really not that good or helpful, and it was weird and old. Next, I read Stop Obsessing: How to Overcome Your Obsessions and Compulsions. This was one of the most specific OCD self-help books I have ever read. Because there are multiple types of OCD, it gave really specific tips that were super detailed, also examples that were super detailed. It also gives you a really simple, digestible plan to overcome all of this. There was no screwing around. It just straight up went into the secrets to curing an obsessive compulsive mind. This was probably the most helpful out of the helpful category, but it still wasn't the best one. Okay, next I read OCD Love Story, which is the first fiction book that just has a character who has OCD. I posted a review of this a couple weeks ago. This was an odd time. It was interesting to finally see a character who represented all of the different things I had been reading about. I have never seen someone who has OCD exhibit it with stalking people. Again, I am not a qualified medical professional, but I have just never seen that. Some people have even argued this character doesn't have OCD at all, but she definitely had other compulsions that were not stalking, such as like having to turn her car around constantly because she thought she hit someone. That's very textbook OCD. But the stalking, I'm confused about that. And also this character was really unlikable, so it was hard to relate to her. I don't think it did a whole lot for me. Probably not too helpful. I'm also confused because I'm like, are people who think like me more prone to stalking? Because I don't know. Next, I read Getting Over OCD, a 10-step workbook for taking back your life. This one had a lot of helpful tips and tricks and also a plan like that previous one I talked about. A whole plan laid out for taking back your life in a certain amount of time. This was the first book that really explained cognitive behavioral therapy to me. It really went in detail with that, which was really helpful because I feel like that's one of the things that can really change someone who has OCD. Somewhere around here, the top of the helpful category, top-ish. Next, I read The Perfect Son. This was about a character who had obsessive compulsive personality disorder. I really liked that character's development. It also made me think maybe this is not what I have because I didn't relate to him too much. He's very rigid. Huge difference between OCD and OCPD is people with OCD really want to change because it affects their life, but people with OCPD, they just make everyone else's life harder. It was strange. It made me think maybe I do not have this. So, okay, I guess. Okay, next I read Every Last Word. Now this was strange because it was kind of similar to OCD Love Story because it showed someone who has OCD exhibiting it, also with symptoms of schizophrenia. It doesn't say outright that that's what she's also dealing with. It's just kind of assumed, which I could see how that can be problematic because then it kind of makes people with OCD think that they are hallucinating the people in their life, which is really not good because then you can start to obsess over that. That part needed to be a little more clarified. If you're gonna mix two different mental illnesses like that, especially when you're advertising it as purely a book about a character who only has OCD, but later on she develops schizophrenia, I didn't think this was that helpful either because in the beginning it talked about these intrusive thoughts that she was having, and it felt like it was going to be a very good setup for something that really explored a character who struggles with this, but then it just didn't develop that at all afterwards, and that was really disappointing because I feel like they could have made something that really helped people. Next I read Sarah and the Search for Normal, which was a prequel to a book about OCD. Anyway, this character, she does struggle with anxiety and depression. I don't think specifically OCD. She does deal with bipolar disorder. It was a really good representation of mental health, one of the best characters. This was pretty helpful for someone who's just dealing with mental health issues in general, not really for someone who's dealing specifically with OCD, but I still recommend it because it is such good representation of mental health when media gets it wrong a lot of times and even does something that's more harmful. Next I read OCdaniel. So I'm gonna put this as the first one in the top category because it has such a good representation of OCD. There's nothing weird about it. It's very much just like reading about a character who has OCD, like straight up. There's nothing that diverges from that. It is straight to the point. The writing style is kind of boring. It's not the most entertaining or riveting book, so I wouldn't recommend it just like for fun. But if you are looking for a character who has OCD, read this one. Next I read Unfuck Your Brain. I was really excited about this one. It was really hyped up, but I don't think I learned a whole lot from it other than a few new like grounding techniques. It was quick and engaging. It was a fun read. I only read it in like an hour, I think, and it had some views on addiction that I had never considered before. Abstinence versus harm reduction. I liked the casual tone and the profanity that was included, but a lot of people are turned off from that or find it cringy. But yeah, it really wasn't helpful, and it was marketed as something that would be very helpful, so probably not helpful at all. So next I read We Can't Keep Meeting Like This. This book was so good. It was such a cute romance. I had such a good time reading it, but the OCD representation is barely there. It's briefly mentioned, and she has it to a very mild degree. So amazing and well written. It had a very diverse group of characters, LGBT. I think she was Jewish, and the love interest was Muslim, I believe. I think his parents are Egyptian immigrants. I love this book so much, but it just really wasn't that helpful. I don't think I learned anything from it about OCD. So next I read The Weight of Our Sky. This had good representation of someone who has OCD in like the number sense, like counting things in a certain number, certain groups of numbers to make sure her family won't die. It also has to do with someone who has OCD. I think it was back in the 70s that this takes place. She lives in Malaysia, so not only is there the mental health stigma of the time, but also Malaysia. Her mom knows that she's struggling with this, but they really don't want her to be freaking lobotomized. It also ties in like their religious ideas surrounding OCD. They believe it's like a demon that is possessing her, so that was interesting to learn about. I thought this was a really good representation, probably the top of the helpful category. Next I read The Rest of Us Just Live Here. This was a pretty weird, boring book about the kids in a fantasy story who are not the chosen one, so they just kind of watch the action happen, and I think that could have been really interesting because it had topics such as parental issues, eating disorders, coming of age, mental health, but it was all really forgettable. I liked that the characters were diverse, and I guess the OCD representation was kind of okay, but it just wasn't really that helpful. Probably the top of the okay section. Next I read 5 Feet Apart. This was an amazing book. I liked the movie even better, but then I found out it's because the movie was created first. But actually the book doesn't even say that Stella, the character who has OCD, it doesn't even say that she has OCD. It's briefly mentioned in the beginning. It talks about it in the movie a little bit more, but overall there's no like representation about it at all. Not helpful category, but it was an amazing book. Just know I recommend it if you need something good to read. Next I read When Panic Attacks, the new drug-free anxiety therapy that can change your life. This was the best one that I read. This talked about cognitive behavioral therapy, exactly what it was. It gets right to the point. It's like step by step on every single page of exactly what you need to be doing and how to fix every single problem, and multiple ways of fixing every single problem if one of them doesn't work. There was a really good chapter on relapsing and saying that every single person relapses, and it tells you exactly step by step what to do when you relapse. Not a single other self-help book I read talked about this, so that was so appreciated. Next I read Under Rose-Tainted Skies. This had more of a representation of agoraphobia, but the character also did have OCD, and it was a good representation, but it didn't talk about it a whole lot. It was a really good book though, but the ending was kind of sudden. That's what made it 4 stars instead of 5. However, it's a really good representation for anybody who's struggling with agoraphobia, just not as much OCD. I think it was maybe the bottom of helpful, somewhere between helpful and okay. So next I read All the Things That Could Go Wrong. This is about 2 different boys. One is a bully, one is the victim. The one who's a bully deals with like anger management issues, and the one who is the victim deals with OCD. You see a lot more character development coming with the boy who has the anger issues. It's told in alternating points of view, so we don't get a full focus on the boy who has OCD. His is okay, and it showed him overcoming like a few obsessions and compulsions, but like the boy with anger issues, I remember his storyline a lot more. more. I feel like that one just had more of an effect on me. It was a middle grade book, and I think I would recommend it more for somebody who is struggling with anger issues, whatever those stem from, probably. So that's probably the bottom of the okay section, between okay and not too helpful. Next, I read The Unfinished Garden. This was one of the cringiest Harlequin romances I've ever seen. The only thing that was good about this was the character who has OCD was like a middle-aged man. Usually you see characters who are either teenagers or young adults, so that's good that there was representation with a different age group. And I think it was represented well, just not touched on a whole lot. It was mostly focused on the weird, cringy romance. If you want to read about someone older who has OCD, I would recommend it, but it doesn't touch on it that much, unfortunately. It didn't leave much of an impression on me, and also it really just isn't good. Somewhere in not too helpful. I don't know. I like that he's older, but it needs to focus on it more. And lastly, I read Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I was really excited about this one. This was kind of all over the place plot-wise, so entertainment-wise, not the best, but I really liked the way he wrote this character and the specific issues she was dealing with her OCD. She was terrified of her gut microbiome and the idea of just bacteria existing inside of her in general. I wish he would have explored that more. As I said, the plot was all over the place, and I feel like he could have written some really good things about what this main character was thinking, but it was more plot driven and kind of all over the place. I don't know. It was great representation though, somewhere around here, maybe in the helpful-ish category. You'll relate to her, but it's not for long, I guess. He has a plot he wants to drive home, so no, it might be in the okay pile. Yeah, the top of okay. So this is my full ranking of all the books that I've read to help with my spiraling thoughts that make me hyperfixate big time and not able to stop Googling things for 7 hours because I'm always seeking reassurance. Thank you again to Wild Rose Press for sponsoring this video. If you guys have any requests of different videos you want me to do, please leave them down in the comments. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it. If you want to follow me on my TikTok, I post updates about my family and Ukraine there. It is right here. If you want to follow me on my Instagram, that is right here. I will see you all next week for another video, and I hope you have an amazing day. Bye, guys.